Good morning, and thanks for joining me on this week's weekly devotion. I'm Pastor Rich here at St. Joseph's Lutheran Church in Town, and as always, I like to look at the lectionary text for the upcoming Sunday, and and then try to think about an aspect of the text that I'm not going to be preaching on that I can utilize as a kind of a devotion, because it works as sort of a devotion for me as well. Because when I'm, digging into the texts for the lectionary, I tend to flesh out more than one topic and then I land on one that I'm going to preach on, but I still have these other ones that kind of interest me. So there's this one topic that is not going to be part of my sermon on Sunday, but it's the same text. I'm going to preach on John 21, the resurrection, one of the third, tongue tied a little bit, the third witness story of the resurrection in John's gospel, and so I'm going to be preaching on that on Sunday. But there's an aspect of it that I think is helpful for devotional purposes, and more so than for a sermon. So let's go and dig in. This is John 21. Now, the lesson for Sunday goes all the way to verse 19. I'm going to stop at verse 8 for today's devotion. Okay, so let me get my goggles on here. So here we go. After these things, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. And he showed himself in this way. Gathered there together were Simon Peter, Thomas called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and two others of his disciples. Simon Peter said to them, "I'm going fishing." They said to him, "We will go with you." They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just after daybreak, Jesus stood on the beach, but the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, "Children, you have no fish, have you?" They answered him, "No." He said to them, "Cast the net to the right side of the boat, and you will find some." So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in because there were so many fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on some clothes, for he was naked, and jumped into the sea. But the other disciples came in the boat, dragging the net full of fish, for they were not far from the land, only about 100 yards off. This is the third time Jesus has met with this gathering of disciples, right? Now, the first time, you remember, it wasn't really Jesus in person who met with the disciples. It was the early morning story of Mary Magdalene at the tomb, and Mary running back to tell them, and Peter, James, and John running to the tomb, and so forth, and witnessing the resurrection that way. Then the second time is the story of the Doubting Thomas piece, where Jesus comes to them, meets with the group of them gathered together in Jerusalem, and shows them his hands and his feet, and says, "Peace be with you," showing that he has been raised from the dead. And I guess if you want to count a second time or a third time in this, he comes back again to that same group, shows himself again, only this time it's specific for Thomas, who was the doubter in the first part because he wasn't there. So now, here we are. This is technically the third resurrection story, but if you break it down as I just did, it's the fourth time that Jesus has returned from the grave to visit then upon the disciples his living witness that he has indeed been raised from the dead, and to once again guide them from where they are to the new place where Jesus wants to take them. And what comes to my mind here is how these disciples have witnessed this resurrection now in multiple places, multiple ways. Now they're at the Sea of Tiberias and they're out on a boat, right? They're fishing. The Sea of Tiberias is the Sea of Galilee, so we're basically back at Capernaum. We're no longer in Jerusalem like the previous one. So there's been some weeks in between here because they would have had to travel. But you have the Jerusalem witness stories, and now you have the Capernaum witness story. And they're each a little different in these stories, each a little different. And they each have a similar way in which Jesus is sort of nudging them forward, right? And helping them to cope with the events that have taken place. And they each have a different nuance. So in the first one, he's saying, he's telling Mary Magdalene, I am not yet ascended. Go and tell my brothers that I've been raised from the dead. Right? That's the first one. So that to turn the grieving of Good Friday into the joy of the resurrection. That's the first one. The second one now, they are terrified of being caught, just like their beloved friend and Rabbi Jesus was. And they're locked inside a room, and Jesus appears to them now in resurrected form. And he says, peace be with you. In other words, don't be afraid, right? Shalom, I bring to you a fullness of life in the resurrection. Peace, he says to them. And in their language, it would have been shalom, which meant a kind of fullness, right? And so now they're still struggling to make sense of their life right now. And you find them now weeks later having journeyed back home, essentially, to Capernaum. And Peter decides to go fishing, and they all join him out in the boat to go fishing, and they catch nothing all night, right? Until Jesus shows up once again and shows them where to find the fish. And in this case, Jesus is showing himself to them and reminding them that he's with them, right? And encouraging them once again. And what comes to mind for me from a devotional perspective in all of these stories, and if you want to layer them in, you also have Matthew, Mark, and Luke, who have also varying different stories. And if we could put all of the resurrection stories together in a kind of a timeline, you see that these disciples are getting the visitation of the resurrected Jesus in multiple ways, in different places, in different settings, and all for what seems like different kind of messages from Jesus, but they all seem to me to have the same purpose. And in our psalm for this Sunday, there in Psalm, I think it's Psalm, let me double check, Psalm 30, we hear this great line that the Lord turns our wailing, our crying, in other words, our grief, into dancing. The Lord takes us from grieving to celebrating, from hopelessness to hope, from pain and suffering to joy. God does that, right? And that process of moving from the darkness to the light is a form of resurrection, an experience of the resurrection. And so now here's Jesus, and in each of these stories, whether you're taking them from Matthew, Mark, Luke, or here in this case the 3/4 that are in John, it's again the same thing, moving from the grief of the cross, and then the grief of no longer having the leader in front of us, the plan, the mission, to them being confused enough, having lost the mission, right, that they're out fishing, and now Jesus is redirecting again and putting them back on the path. Jesus is moving them from the grief of the cross, from the grief of losing Jesus in their physical presence every day, Jesus moving them from the loss of the idea, the hope, the plan that they had, the mission they had, and redirecting them now to a new mission. And it's this the miraculous thing. It's the same mission, only now they're going to follow characters like Peter, and then in other texts we're going to follow Paul. And so Jesus is still the one doing it, though. He's still the one doing the healing here. It's God's work through Christ all over again. You know, I in all my years of ministry, I've had lots of stories that I could tell about this moving from grief to celebration, or grief to hope, or pain to hope, or loss to hope and hopefulness. I've had lots of people, and been a part of helping people see hopefulness through the darkness and the light in the darkness. One of the stories resonates with me, though, for this, and it's a woman who had lost her husband, and I had visited her many, many times. I'm going to leave the name off in case she checks in on this, but she had lost her husband, and it was I don't remember how long they were married, but it was a long time. I'm going to say more than 60 years they were together, and it was really a devastating loss to her. She and one of the things she told me was, and in the days and weeks after talking with her, she said, Pastor, she said, I'm already retired. I don't really have like a job or anything, but it just seems like all the pieces of my life have fallen apart, and I don't know how to put them back together. That was such a beautiful, perfect image of what grief does to us. It takes the pieces of the puzzle of our lives and just turns them upside down and fractures it so that they're all scrambled again, and our lives have to be put back together. And that's what it's like, to be in the process of grief. And we have to start putting our pieces back together to find a way in which we can envision who we are again, and what our mission and purpose in life is again, without this loved one as my partner. This is what the disciples are going through, right? For 3 years, they have had Jesus there in person, showing them, teaching them, guiding them. And now they don't have him in the way in which they used to. They catch him in these flashes, right? Or he's there. He shows up on Easter morning, and then he shows up in Easter evening, and now 3 weeks later in John, he's showing up at the Sea of Galilee while they're fishing. And imagine if you're the disciples, you're still trying to sort out your life. And Jesus shows up and reminds them in this text today that he's always with them, that even when they're out in the boat fishing, he's still monitoring their welfare, right? Maybe from a distance, maybe in a different form, but he's still caring for them. He's still there with them. And I think that's an important thing for us, that when we're in that process of going from grief to celebration, from mourning to dancing, as the Bible describes it in the Psalm, when we're in that scrambled puzzle pieces all over the floor kind of state, even though there's these glimpses of resurrection in the Bible, what God is trying to say through all of these different stories, by giving us all these different stories, you catch an idea that God is with us in every situation. I mean, think about it. Wouldn't have been more efficient, right? I mean, if we're thinking through things from our own kind of way in which we tend to think through things, we would do things more efficiently. Jesus would show up one time, right? Keep it efficient, keep it cheap or inexpensive, save the costs of all this flying around the world, right? One time, get everybody that you want together into one place so that you can show one time that I'm raised from the dead, and now go out and get to work, right? If that really was the way humans could work through grief, Jesus would have done that. But that's just not the way grief and the overcoming of grief works. It's a process. It takes time, right? And so with all of these different resurrection stories from the 4 Gospels and the ones that we see and we're reading in John, what we can grasp hold of is that this process of going from the grief of the cross to the healing that sets about a new mission in the end is a process that we can relate to as well. All right? Because Peter becomes someone through this process all right, who will lay down his life for Jesus. No more is he going to deny Jesus. The Apostle Paul we're introduced to in the book of Acts comes from someone who was ridiculing and hunting down the early church of Christians to someone who now is an enormous advocate, the one who goes to the Gentiles and preaches the gospel to them. Complete change of things, but it takes time. And in Paul's story, it's Ananias who gives him the time and the teaching and the healing. My point to all this is that with all of these stories, when we're in that phase of going through things, the multiple stories of resurrection are to remind us that no matter what our circumstance, no matter what our situation, God is with us. And what a blessing it is to have so many different resurrection stories, because in each one of those we catch a different nuance that one of them we might be able to relate our own circumstance to, and find then the promise that God is with us, right, in all of these different circumstances. And just like my friend who told me that her life was like the puzzle that got turned upside down, she started to find hope because she would tell me how she starts she would start to actually see in her own mind, right? Start to see reflections of her deceased husband, still kind of encouraging her and strengthening her and being with her. And I would tell her, that that's the way God is working in her life. That doesn't mean that everyone's grief story is going to be the same. I got to tell you, in all my years of ministry, there is no grief story that is the same. Nobody grieves and gets through it the same way. But it is the same God that carries us through it. And that's the beauty of the multiple resurrection stories, right? And so we latch on to whatever we can hold on to through grief, and we find ourselves either in the boat with Peter and the disciples, or in the room where we need to hear peace be with you, or in other gospels on the road to Emmaus, and so forth, right? So my friends, wherever you are in your journey from confusion, darkness to light and hope, wherever you are in a journey, just know that the resurrection stories of the Bible are God's way of saying, I'm with you, all right? I'm with you. So take that and hold on to that through those difficult times, all right? God bless you. Let's pray together. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as in heaven. Give us today our daily bread, and forgive us our sins, as we forgive those who sin against us. And save us from the time of trial. Deliver us from evil, for yours is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Have a great day. So Sunday morning, we have worship at 9 o'clock with Holy Communion this week, first Sunday in May. So come out and join us for worship, 9 o'clock. See you then. Take care. Bye-bye.